Hey guys, so today I'm talking about creating a hummingbird fountain that's just made from a simple soda bottle, and it will cause hummingbirds to literally just swarm your garden. If you have one here and there, this will increase their numbers 100-fold, and it's super simple to put together, nothing complicated, and you're probably going to pay less than $20 to get everything assembled. So guys, in addition to showing you how to put this fountain together, I'm going to give you lots and lots of tips on ways to attract hummingbirds to your garden. Sometimes you may only see one hummingbird here and one hummingbird there, but I'm going to show you a lot of different ways to draw them in like a magnet. You'll have more hummingbirds in your garden than you've ever seen before, and especially around this feeder, and you'll be amazed at how they love the feeder. I keep saying feeder, I meant to say fountain. They'll love this fountain and it'll be drawn right to it. Now, as I said earlier, this all came from my local dollar store, and if you don't have a dollar store close to you, I'll put Amazon links to the closest things I can find to it. But if you'll notice, there's a common theme with all of these plastic components that I'm putting together for our fountain is that they're red. Red is the #1 color that will draw hummingbirds in. So just remember, you need to have at least part of your fountain in a very bright red color that will draw them in. Now, in addition to red being a very important color for our fountain, there's another thing that you have to take into consideration. Do you have any outdoor predators like a cat? Well, we actually have 3 outdoor cats, and 2 of them are very good hunters. They can hunt down a bird in a matter of just seconds if they get close to them. So I'm going to show you how, by using this old planter right here, how you can keep your hummingbirds safe, and you might actually get a better view of them. So just remember, there's a way around it if you do have cats in your garden. Now, the main component of our fountain is a soda bottle, and you can either use something like this, a 2-liter bottle, or even a downsized bottle. And if you don't have one, but if you have some type of plastic drinking container like this, you could use something like this as well. And this may actually be a little bit more durable. But just remember, the main component of this fountain is a soda bottle. Now, I've got an extra bottle right here because I'm going to use this one to cut it in half so I can create a template for the base of our water catch here. The water catch needs to be just the right size, and there's a couple of tricks to making this work. So you'll have an upper fountain and you'll actually have a lower fountain, and that's why you're going to have birds, hummingbirds specifically, just swarming the entire thing. So just remember, having an extra bottle to create your template is going to be quite a help to you. You want to try to measure exactly what point your bottle is going to be coming out of the container so you don't cut it too large. So it needs to be just the right size in your container. Now, the first thing we need to do, we need to be able to cut a hole just the right size for our water basin, the secondary water basin. And so this was actually a lid from a 5-gallon bucket. You can use lots of different lids. This lid was from, I think, Lowe's or Home Depot. Of course, using the bottom side is not as good because this side has a lip around it, so you'll have a little bit of small standing water in there. And you can always add very small pebbles or gravel to make it easier for the birds to walk around. But anyways, on this black one, we need it to be just the right diameter. So we're going to cut one of these balls in half, and we can mark it out knowing exactly how big the hole needs to be. Now, even though we're using this first bottle as just a template, you don't throw this away because these make excellent funnels. So I would just store this away in your greenhouse or your garden shed, and you'll find that these are very handy for using as funnels. You can drill a hole and have a very small, slow flowing funnel, or take the cap off and have a full flowing funnel. So just remember, everything when it comes to plastic can be reused in some way, so you can have kind of a recycle thing going in your garden. All right, so we want to make sure we press down firmly so this moves at very, very minimum. And we don't want to distort the bottle shape too much, but just try to slowly work your way around the bottle. Angle your marker in so you can get as close to the edges as possible, because you don't want to have a lot of space there. You want the birds to be able to be in this area with a little bit of standing water before it goes back into our main reservoir. So just remember that the bottle needs to be as tightly fit in there as possible on the 5-gallon bucket lid. Now I'm going to use one of these old lunchroom trays so I don't cut into my wood table, and we're just going to cut as slowly and carefully as we can with a razor blade. Remember, it's a good idea to use gloves if you're not used to using a razor blade because it's easy to slip on this plastic. Now we have our basin here on the bottom, and we have our soda bottle here. We're going to carefully fit what we've just cut over the top of the soda bottle like that. Now, if you have too big of a gap, if you've cut it a little bit too large, you can use something like aquarium sealant, which once it's dry is perfectly safe and it wouldn't hurt the birds. But remember, a general sealant you don't want to use. You want to use something that specifically says aquarium sealant if you want to seal around the bottle carefully, and that will be perfectly safe once it's dry. That's the thing to remember. When it's still wet, allow it about 48 hours to completely cure and dry, so that way you won't be harming any birds accidentally. Okay, so let's test our bathing platform here, and I'm just going to carefully pull it down. It's a very tight fit, and so the great thing is the lower water basin here fits on there as well. If you find that it's slipping off the edges, what you can do is you can take a zip tie, not inside the water catch area, but around the outer edges, and you can zip tie it to the water basin, because our water basin is not going to be filled up all the way to the edge. It's going to be a couple inches below the top. So if you needed to secure it even more, you could zip tie the platform on the top. But just remember, we want standing water to be in this outer area here so that even more birds can come in. So just remember, again, with the aquarium sealant, if you need to, if you find too much water is going through there, but we're going to be putting holes all the way around the outer edge so it can drain properly and it won't overflow during its operation. So just remember that the cracks there is okay, but if you want a perfect seal, and you probably need to put more holes around the outer edges. But as far as the way this is set up, you won't need any special aquarium glue, as it's going to work just fine the way it is. So what I believe attracted the most hummingbirds to this feeder was this kitchen strainer, and the way it looks, it almost looks as though it's a very, very large flower. So that's why I really like using red, because red is the #1 color to draw in hummingbirds. So we're going to need to cut a hole in the bottom of our kitchen strainer. Try to make sure you do this just right, because this bottle now is not going to be all the way down to the widest portion as the 5-gallon bucket container. So it's going to be a little bit higher up, so you need to very carefully measure and estimate exactly where it needs to be. Now it's got the perfect fit on there. It's not going to move down, and we've created a small gap here, so a little bit of noise from the water dripping off the edge of it might attract even more birds in. But like I say, there's like about a 1/4 inch gap there, and again, you can use aquarium sealant if you want to make a perfect seal, but I think there's going to be more of a dripping noise coming out of this as it comes out of the top of our soda bottle, and it will create more interest and more attraction to the hummingbirds in our fountain. So I want to talk for a minute about what type of pump you need to use, and these pumps have become incredibly affordable. This pump right here is very small, but it is electric powered. So if you have access to an extension cord or a plug, you can use something like this. But a lot of people in their garden, they may not have access to an outlet. So I would recommend getting something like this. These are also very affordable, $20 to $30 for something that's going to last for years and years. It comes with the pump, the solar panel, and the tubing that you need to use. So I'll put links in the description to both types of pumps depending on what your personal needs are. But you're going to need just a very small pump to make this work properly. So next we're going to need to cut a hole in our soda bottle, and it doesn't have to be a very large hole, just large enough to get your pump inside. So just remember, just a few inches tall and a few inches wide should make it easy to install your pump in the soda bottle. Now next we're going to need to drill a hole in the very center of our top of our soda bottle. So you can either use a drill bit, a soldering iron, or even a pair of scissors. But you just want to be very careful when you do this. Again, with the drill, this drill bit is pretty sharp, so again, be careful. Now next we want to make sure we get our tubing at just the right length. It's going to need to stick up just a maybe 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch above the top or the cap of the bottle. Also, it needs to go as close to the bottom as possible. We're going to weigh the bottom down with a few stones in there to make sure it doesn't tip over or start to have a floating effect inside the water. So just remember that our tubing needs to be exactly the right size. You can take a pair of scissors, and this tubing is pretty flexible, that when it comes with the pump, and you can just measure it exactly where you need it. Now I've forced our tubing through the top of this cap, and depending on what you want to do from this point on, I'll show you a couple of different options to make it easy for the hummingbirds to perch up here. Now you could scour the top of this, but I'm going to show you an idea I had to make it even easier for hummingbirds to sit atop your fountain and they won't slip off due to the slipperiness of the plastic. Now this cork, I have a whole set of these in all different sizes, but it's going to add a little bit more surface area where the water's coming out and makes it a whole lot easier for the hummingbirds to sit atop our fountain. And also cork is very, very waterproof, so you don't have to worry about this rotting away. So again, just put this on as an option if you don't want to go with this method and just scouring up the top of this to make it easier. Take some sandpaper and rough up the top of this to make it a little bit more easier for the hummingbirds to grip, because they have very small talons. And again, I'm going to go with this option right here and adding more surface area to where the water is going to be coming out. Now I've upsized my drill bit just a bit because I was able to ream the plastic, but on the cork I want to do this a little bit more gently because our cork might disintegrate. So I'm just going to go in here very gently, not a lot of pressure, and just try to work my way through the cork. All right, so we've drilled out our cork there, and this adds, like I said, a little bit more surface area and makes it a little bit easier for the hummingbirds to grab on. I'm going to work the top of the hose back through, and so once we do that, we can either glue this down with some hot glue, or we can use the aquarium glue as I mentioned earlier. We're going to run that into the top of our bottle, tighten down the lid, check and see exactly where we're at. Okay, yep, should be very easy to hook that up there. And like I said, you're going to need to put gravel in this to make sure that it doesn't tip over and it's a little bit more stable. So your pump is not going to be sitting on the direct bottom of our plastic bottle, but probably maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches up there. Okay, so I've added some gravel to the base of our soda bottle, and that really adds a lot more weight, and it feels a lot more stable and less likely to tip over or start to have that floating effect. If the water in there gets too low, it would act as kind of a boat. So just make sure you put some gravel at the very base of it. Now next we're going to hook up our pump. Now I've added this little plastic item right here to make it easier to go into our tubing, because what I noticed was the one that came with it didn't have a perfect fit. So I just cut the tip off of another type of plastic squeeze bottle type container to make it a little bit easier, and I think it slips on a lot better. So we're going to put that back inside the bottle, and then we'll go for our test run. Again, the top doesn't have to be perfect. This one has a little bit of a tilt to it, but that's fine because the water is going to come out in a 1 to 2 inch little spout there. So just remember, this really helps the hummingbirds get a good grip when they're taking a bath. Now I mentioned at the beginning of the video about how to protect your hummingbirds from predatory cats, and I'm going to use this hanging basket that I hadn't used in a couple years, and it was just inside of the work shed. But one thing you want to do is you want to add a little bit of gravel to it to add some weight in case you have a really strong wind coming through. So you just want to kind of stabilize it there. Our water basin will be on the inside of it, not too noticeable, but the outside of this hanging basket has a really nice look to it. So that'll kind of add a little bit of class to our hummingbird fountain. Now I've added the gravel to increase the weight of the overall basket. Our internal water basin is inside of there. We try to level it up as much as we can. And if it's not perfectly level, you can use smaller gravel. Sometimes the larger size gravel can make it a little bit uneven. But remember, we're not filling this all the way to the top initially. We're just only doing about halfway up. So we're going to set our soda bottle right in the middle. Then we're going to put our lid carefully on there. Just pull it down. It's a pretty tight fit. And so it really covers up our basin. Our electrical cord comes out the side. But if, like I said, if you're using solar, you could do the same thing. You could just mount these little small solar panels off to one side, kind of out of the way. But I'm going to show you, just for today, I'm going to show you hooking up to 110 volts because we have a limited amount of sunshine today. There's a little bit of sun out, but we're having a pretty cloudy day. And that's one thing to remember. If you are using solar, the fountain may not work as well as you can on a fairly sunshiny day. So that's our initial setup there. Any overflow will go into this bottom basin, which drains out the bottom. I have some original holes drilled because this originally acted as a planter, but the majority of it is going to go back into our water basin. I'm going to drill holes in our top here, but make sure that you're drilling them directly over your water basin so it flows back into the water basin. Some amount of water will go in here if you didn't seal it around the base of the bottle itself. So let's drill those holes and then finish up the last few steps. All right, so let's put our kitchen strainer back on top. And again, this doesn't have to come in contact with the 5-gallon bucket lid. And the more red you have, the better. That's going to be the thing that attracts. If you've ever noticed, a hummingbird feeder is usually made with red plastic type glass and then red top on the bottom and the top. So red really attracts hummingbirds right to it. So let's get this thing to running and we'll take it out to the garden. I'll show you exactly how it's working. Now, one thing I nearly forgot to mention is there's really going to be a boost to your hummingbird fountain if you have the right type of plants are in there. So right here on the screen, I'm going to put the best type of annuals, perennials, shrubs, and vines that will attract the most hummingbirds. So take a look at that list, freeze frame it, or take a screenshot of it, and you'll know exactly what you need to plant, because that's going to also boost the amount of hummingbirds you have around your fountain. So guys, I wanted to give you a close-up of the fountain actually working there. There's a nice little perch they can land on the cork. It makes it a little bit easier. The plastic can be very slippery. It's really one of those things that you want to create the perfect environment. You want this to be maybe in part shade. You don't want it in full sunlight because it can be too hot in the hottest points or hottest times of summertime. You want to have some other feeders close by, even though this is not a feeder, this is a fountain, but you want to have some hummingbird feeders close by that's going to be already drawing them in, and then they'll see the fountain, and then eventually they'll become more comfortable with it, and then eventually they'll start using it, and before you know it, you might actually have a hummingbird swarm, or like a magnetic effect to your hummingbirds going right to your fountain. So remember, planting those plants I showed you on the screen, select a couple of those, and that can provide nectar for your hummingbirds. So you just want to make it as an inviting habitat as you can for your hummingbirds. So guys, one of the things I've noticed is once hummingbirds start finding the fountain, the numbers become greater and greater, and before you know it, they're fighting over the perch. So if you wanted to, you could create something like this. So this is a silk flower holder. You can also get this at your dollar store. I'll put a link in the description, but you can put this around where you were putting the cork, and there'll be more surface area for them to bathe on. So 2 or 3 hummingbirds at one time can get at the top of the fountain. So guys, I really appreciate you watching. If you have a question about this video or any previous video, I hope you'll become a public subscriber first, because I put those questions and comments ahead of all the others. It just becomes nearly impossible to answer 100 to 300 questions a day. Also, if you're interested in added content, I'll be adding content to my Patreon every week and growing that as well. So if you want to see content that may never appear on YouTube, please become a Patreon member for as little as $5 a month. I really appreciate you watching, and have a great day.